So we've got another caller, Jeff from Dothan. Jeff, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, I wanted to talk to the doctor about or what was the inclusion between Israel and Africa.
Good question, Jeff. Dumisani, we'll let Dumisani take this question as well. Dumisani, what is the relationship between Israel and Africa? Again, this is something that I know that you can lecture on for probably a couple of days, but let's give Jeff just a little bit of background about the relationship between Israel and Africa, and of course how you see and your perspective of how Africa and Israel rise and fall together.
I talk about it quite a bit in my book, Zionism in the Black Church, and quite simply put, Israel's most ancient international relationship is with Africa. And it's spelled out many different times in Scripture, but one of those key times would be 1 Kings chapter 10, when literally the Queen of Sheba, and Sheba is the name of a region that's connected to Cush, which would be Ethiopia, around this region, Northeast Africa, literally 3,000 years ago, travels with a huge caravan, some 1,500 plus miles to Jerusalem to meet with King Solomon. This is all both in the Ethiopian and as well as the Jewish history, which would be 1 Kings. This meeting is discussed so magnanimous for you Bible students out there. So magnanimous was this meeting. Jesus, 1,000 years later, references it in the book of Luke and in the book of Matthew about the Queen of the South coming to visit. And why was that visit so important? It was the only visit like it in which a foreign region came in friendship to Israel, declaring God's love for Israel and their solidarity. Is what we like to call in our organization the first Africa-Israel Summit, was 3,000 years ago in Jerusalem. That's just one example of how far back and deep the Africa-Israel ties go.
So in those ties, though, in modern times, let's kind of bring it forward. What are you seeing there, Dumisani?
What we're seeing now, it's an amazing thing happening. Those of you who are following anything in the Middle East, you've heard about what's called the Abraham Accords, in which Arab nations that were formerly hostile to Israel are now making friends. They are actually making peace with Israel. It's something we've never seen before in this modern era. But what we also see is that Israel, of the 54 African nations that are part of the African Union, Israel has deep ties with 44 of them, right? And this has been the case since Israel was reconstituted as a nation in 1948. You're talking about from Nigeria to Zimbabwe to you all over the continent, but deep ties that are about medicine and science and education. These ties run really deep, and they are actually connected to that ancient tie, that tie that we actually talked about, this love between the two. It's not talked about in the media, which is why I wrote a book about it, because it is quite remarkable to see this type of connection between Israel and the modern nations of Africa today.
Oh, very good. So I'm glad you were able to pack it in there in just a couple of moments, Dumisani. I've read your book. It is enthralling. And just as a reminder too, Dr. Clark, we were able to secure a purchase of 100 of Dumisani's books at a discount, and we will be giving 100 of those books away on Tuesday night. And so, Jeff, if you would like a copy of the book, just let our producer know your address. We know Tony. We know him personally. We'll make sure that Tony gets a copy of your book as well. And if you call in tonight, we'll be happy to ship you one or have you pick up one from our offices.